Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to TBR's webinar, 5G Reality vs. Hype, with TBR Executive Analyst Michael Sullivan-Trainor. I'm Justin Surgeon, and I'm hosting today's session. With claims about 5G's reality diverging from its actual prospects, TBR will separate the truth from the hype about how far along 5G is and which vendors are leading. TBR will project what the industry can expect in progress in the next few years. This webinar will highlight what progress service providers have made implementing their strategies, including which network technologies and which providers are leading the way. We will also highlight areas of spending expectation and spotlight net new investments for suppliers. Finally, the webinar will highlight the strategies of these key suppliers. Insights from today's webinar are from our 5G Market Landscape Report. If you'd like to learn more about that report, please reach out to myself or Michael after the presentation. Now, before we begin, there are a few housekeeping items I'd like to cover. First, we'll be recording today's session and posting it on our YouTube site, TBRI channel. We encourage you to visit our channel and watch this presentation or any of the others we've posted. Second, we'd like to hear your thoughts and opinions on the material we're presenting. Please send any questions to the Q&A function, and we'll address them at the end of the discussion. And finally, we will be sending out these slides for today's webinar, as well as the recording link to everyone registered for today's presentation within 24 hours of the conclusion of the webinar. You can also find these slides, as well as our previous webinar slides, thought leadership pieces, and commentaries on SlideShare at slideshare.net/TBR_market_insight. And now let me introduce the analyst presenting today. Michael Sullivan-Trainor is an executive analyst in TBR's Telecom practice, where he oversees TBR's Telecom practice portfolio, including the NFV portfolio, 5G portfolio, CAPEX and OPEX forecasts, operator metrics, and vendor and operator benchmarks. Michael leverages his 25 years of experience in the telecom industry to provide the thought leadership and insight that's indicated in project work here at TBR. And with that, let me hand this over to Michael.
Thank you very much, Justin, and thank you everyone for attending this webinar on 5G. As Justin mentioned, we will be looking at defining what 5G is. What we can see of it today in many ways, 5G feels like a distant planet that's getting closer and closer to orbiting the Earth, and as it gets closer, we can better define what it is and what its properties are and what its characteristics are, and that's what we're doing with this webinar. Look at some predictions about when 5G will become a commercial event that we can all participate in. What are some of the benefits and challenges that are going to occur as a result of 5G? And then pretty quickly, we are seeing the evolution of 5G have different views and different advancements from stakeholders in different regions. So we'll look at the regional view of 5G as it's being addressed globally, but from different perspectives. What's the market impact? And by that we mean what's the impact on current commercial services that operators are benefiting from today and that will, in fact, be important to the future benefit based on 5G characteristics. We are seeing a very powerful connection to the developments going on in network functions, virtualization, and software-defined networks, almost being folded directly into the total work that 5G encompasses, both by suppliers and operators. Many of the decisions that are made to support a 5G architecture have to be decided and understood, early architectural decisions, as people move to NFV and SDN core networks. And last but not least, we'll look at who are some of the leading operators and what they're doing with 5G and what some of the suppliers are doing, and try and finish with some thoughts about what might be beyond 5G or where 5G can take us. So again, thank you for attending, and let's get started. So first, what is 5G? Very important to have a consensus on definition, and happily believe the community is moving closer and closer to consensus after a few early years of 5G being everything, which made it ill-defined, to more clearly a set of performance characteristics. And so we see these as key elements of 5G and the consensus performance characteristics that are driving the research and development that's going on that will drive product development and will begin to inform some of the capabilities that users and operators can expect from 5G. as we say, it's not a panacea. There are going to be limitations, even within the scope of 5G. There will be places where it will be difficult to fulfill the complete set of characteristics that our 5G can offer. That is to say, everyone on the globe being able to achieve these kinds of characteristics will be a difficult proposition for a lot of different reasons of urbanization versus rural areas and so on. But in general, the consensus is around speed, capacity, latency, and that informs a set of technology requirements. So speed, we see the movement in the early days now, leading up to 1 gigabit per second over the air, moving to a 10 gigabit per second destination as a 5G benchmark. So many of us say when we're able to understand a peak data rate of 10 gigabits as a real commercial event, that will be a strong signal that 5G has actually arrived. In addition, it will not just be the data rate, but it also be with what level of latency that the data is available. So under a millisecond, or 50 times faster than 4G, is another key benchmark. High amount of data, a large capacity of data delivered at a extremely low latency to support a variety of applications that we'll talk about in a few minutes. And then how many users and how much data can be processed in this way. So we come to capacity, which probably that's the most variable of the characteristics. That is to say, 100 to 1,000 times more capacity than 4G. Well, obviously, 1,000 times more capacity than 4G will yield a lot more access to heavy data analytic kind of applications than 100 times more capacity. So we'll see quite a variance, and that's really going to be application-based. I believe 100 times more capacity is going to be a good benchmark to consider as well. And in order to get there, there's a large number of technology evolutions that have to take place. One of them we're already deeply into, and that's densification. So in order to achieve these characteristics, the availability of radio access on the ground has to be much denser than it is today. So we're seeing the deployment of small cells. We're seeing the folding in of Wi-Fi access points into the definition of 5G, just so that we can move forward with a highly dense network that's capable of dealing with new kinds of spectrum, such as millimeter or centimeter wave spectrum, to really provide a maximization of spectrum to deliver the data speeds and capacity and latency that we're talking about here. We're also talking about the ability to utilize even greater antenna and transmission capability through MIMO. Multipath propagation is going to be required to parse the spectrum even finer. New antenna designs to support this. And not least of all, interworking of the RAN technology at the various levels we're talking about here to allow the system to act in a more autonomous fashion. We're going to speak more in detail about some of the technical issues, and certainly the technical challenges to achieve these elements are a preoccupation of the industry today. However, there will be also business and usage challenges as well. That said, will there be a big bang? Will there be a time when we see the environment of 5G suddenly appear and that planet being very close to our orbit? In 2020, I believe, many people believe the Big Bang will occur. In fact, in the early days of specification of 5G, there was much thought given to say we shouldn't even talk about commercialization of 5G elements until 2020. That will be the magical date. In some ways, it still is. However, we don't foresee it being a Big Bang. Two major reasons for this: the complexity of the technical challenges I just listed are progressing, requiring progress being made in different realms at different times at different speeds. Densification taking place at different speed, then extensions of LTE for new architectures. a different pace for understanding how to offer or deliver millimeter wave spectrum, understanding how to deal with a new architecture for bandwidth on demand, how to move from a cell per subscriber connection to some new architecture where we have this ability to target the network towards the latency requirements or the user requirements. And then other issues around front haul and back haul need to be solved. All these things are going to be solved at a different rate, and we believe different elements of 5G are going to become available at different times over the course of the development. So we don't see a single technology big bang from the technical perspective. Neither do we see it from the operator perspective. We'll talk more specifically about that, but suffice to say, in today's market, capital environments for different operators in different regions require different approaches to 5G. Investments to move the technology forward or look at deployment schedules are required for different scales of operators in different locations. So the big bang, in fact, will not happen as a big bang. Instead, we believe it's going to look more like fireworks. There'll be pops and explosions of 5G here and there on some highly dense regions with highly capitalized operators who are already well up the curve in terms of 5G definition are going to be offering these kinds of services first to their populations. Others will be behind that. And different vendors, too, are going to participate in this. We've already seen some small versions of this with different vendors or operators experimenting with more advanced flavors of carrier aggregation or LTE extensions, offering higher bandwidth for certain applications, certain areas that have highly dense populations and characteristics like that. So a lot of fireworks on the way to 5G in achievement of different technical advances that are going to be, in fact, our bridge to get us to a place where by 2020 we'll have a vast number of users able to partake in the 5G ecosystem. But on the way, we'll see a lot of small fireworks. All that said, efforts persist to create a more concrete timeline. One of those is put forward here. This is actually based on recent European Commission documentation, because the European Commission has decided to put a stake in the ground around 5G. We're going to talk about that in our regional differences as to why that's going on. It indicates, however, this gradual movement of deployment of 5G technologies and capabilities. Interestingly, it is a collaboration among operators, suppliers, and even nations. We are doing the evolution as a national identity piece for many of these things, and in that way it's very resonant of what happened with previous generations of wireless infrastructure. We saw certainly a claim to being the first in 2G and 3G in the European marketplace. The U.S. has taken a leadership in LTE, more from an operator leadership than a national leadership, and Asian markets have taken their own position. We'll come to that. So the national identity of being not just a broadband infrastructure nation, but a wireless broadband infrastructure nation is a big driver of 5G in a way that it has been in the past as well for previous radio technologies. However, cooperation across nations and across suppliers and across operators is more prevalent and, in fact, perhaps somewhat easier going today than has been in the past, because the technical challenges, the economic challenges are hard for any single organization or set of organizations to achieve, and the ability to take advantage of each other's discoveries and benefits is very much on the table. So we have, although the 5GPP proof of concepts is going to basically be run out of the EU, we see parallel efforts going on in the U.S. market. We see the joint research efforts of Korea, Japan, and the EU, even in the coming year, with the goal of having a number of experimental infrastructures in place and ongoing R&D across the marketplace. As we continue that, we understand there are some benchmark dates that are important to be aware of. The Olympics tend to be key value demonstrations for the industry. And so we have the Olympics in Winter Olympics in South Korea as a place for an early demonstration of high bandwidth, high characteristics of 5G. And the vendors participating in that tend to have an edge in being able to move into that space. Similarly, by 2020, it will be the Summer Olympics in Tokyo that really is the first global showcase for 5G that we expect to see, and then the continued advance by a number of commercial offerings by different operators in different regions. So there is a sense of a timeline, and there is a sense of a progression of capabilities and across different regional and operator environments. From there, let's turn to a little bit about the benefits and challenges. As we have an ongoing process of innovation, what are going to be some of the use cases that are going to have value? Because certainly it's not about technology, it's about business value. And we'll talk a little bit more about this a little bit later in the presentation, but at first blush, there are at least 3 or 4 things or areas that 5G enables that cannot quite be enabled in the same way today. We are seeing a tremendous focus on video and media, both in terms of the purchase of media properties and content, the emphasis of delivering higher quality and more reliable media and entertainment applications to the mobile device because of the deployment of smartphones and other devices. So this notion of media anywhere is already taken hold. It has a lot of limitations in the LTE environment, and in the sub-LTE environment it's actually problematic to deliver it in a truly seamless experience across devices. So we believe the advance of media and media business models is going to be a key driver of 5G, something many of the operators are already engaged with. Add to that user-defined performance requirements. This is something that we are not able to really effectively implement today, but more and more we believe the ability of users to use that on-demand capability that 5G is going to support to have a user-defined video or media experience, which opens up another set of business models and moves us to a user-based view of how different ways media's delivery can cater to the user, breaking some of the limitations of media issues today, such as whether it violates a net neutrality to offer different users different kinds of content. Well, if the users define it, arguably that can be a way to take us out of that conversation. Another is the need to bucketize different media content that limits user choice and creates a pricing battle or pricing issue for users. Perhaps the ability to have more of an internet-based media model will be supported by 5G in a way that will allow more flexibility for the user. So we see media as a key driver. As often talked about, I believe more recently, Internet of Things becomes very valuable as a set of business models for 5G, largely because now with 5G you can cater the network, the wireless infrastructure to different kinds of Internet of Things implementations. So whether it be a massively data analytic approach that's going to inform a lot of sensor inputs to take action in a certain application, or it can have multi-mode environments of different wireless technologies or different endpoints that need to have activation for Internet of Things. It makes things like the connected car concept, the home automation, the industrial automation much more viable with a network that's much more flexibly able to cater to the kinds of application requirements that Internet of Things will introduce. We also believe mission-critical IoT is difficult to achieve in today's environment. This means layers of security and layers of capacity are going to be brought into the IoT space to deliver mission-critical IoT for enterprise in a way that 5G will be able to enable in a highly dense network that you can't quite achieve with early days of LTE. And last but not least, augmented or virtual reality to inform both the consumer experience or the commerce experience, as well as different kinds of gaming and entertainment experiences over mobile environments is going to be another driver of 5G. That one's probably a little bit further out to develop, but will clearly be an economic value for operators to participate in. On the challenge to getting us to some of those benefits, as I mentioned, there are a number of technical issues. These are a few of the technical issues and a few of the business issues. So we have not yet succeeded outside the lab. Inside the lab, it's multi-carrier aggregation. Massive carrier aggregation is not yet a reality. Massive MIMO is not yet a reality. These are both key developments that are required to get us there. So if you're looking to benchmark 5G, when we see the roadmap to massive carrier aggregation, massive MIMO, we'll know we're much closer to the path, and again, believe that we'll be very far along the path within 5 years. Standards consensus on how we achieve some of those steps. Are we simply going to extend LTE as a standards air interface and then develop a new core architecture behind that? That seems to be some of the earliest consensus. Whether that holds or not, we'll see as some of the technical challenges run into some limitations from that approach. Spectrum allocation, spectrum efficiency, use of white space spectrum, freeing up spectrum in general to achieve the kind of capacity and data rates that we're talking about for 5G. A lot of regulatory negotiation to be accomplished with that. Another benchmark area, though, we believe the national interests that are driving 5G is going to help us solve some of the spectrum roadblocks that we tend to see in the marketplace, different regions, different layers of that. Today, there's a diffusion of R&D efforts. We see R&D happening in parallel in many operators, in many suppliers, and in universities. Not necessarily all sharing it because there's a bit of a jockeying, as you can imagine, for a proprietary edge to delivering 5G, especially as we look to extend things like the traditional approach to LTE. So there's a concern that the competition in R&D, yes, it's going to cause people to push the innovative envelope, but whether that benefit is going to be shared and we're going to achieve as easy a ramp up because of trying to merge different efforts in R&D is a challenge. And in our world today, there's no central organization. 5GPP is not necessarily the global organization for merging all the R&D efforts. We believe independent efforts outside of the European theater are going to move at different paces than 5GPP. And there has been a lack of a business focus. The 4 areas that I have on the left about 5G benefits notwithstanding, operators are just beginning to understand how they can gain business benefit from the investment in 5G. And of course, this is a big hurdle as we talk about a tight capital environment. How do you justify any kind of investment in 5G technologies if the business benefits are not apparent? The industry in general has to do more work on the business case for 5G, not necessarily focusing on the sub-technologies, but on the net value of the characteristics I mentioned at the front of the presentation. What do those characteristics allow for business use cases similar to what I talked about on the left-hand side? And in fact, we're able to do proof of concept of business use cases in today's world, even before we achieve the technology. So as I believe hasn't quite fully been taken on, but I believe should be taken on, we need a parallel business value development to the technical value that's going on in the industry. So now we'll go from the overview of 5G in terms of issues and benefits to some of the regional and market impacts, and then some of the operators and vendor views. first we'll look at what's going on regionally. As I indicated earlier, different regions moving at different rates by virtue of the economic and technical environment. So the place to look for 5G value first is going to be densely populated fiber-rich environments. We're seeing Hong Kong, we're seeing Seoul, we're seeing areas where there's already a dense amount of fiber available for backhaul. We're seeing a lot of density of access points. The ability to create some of the spectrum advantages to deliver characteristics of 5G performance are already evident in key cities, particularly in the Asian marketplace. So here we have a few cases where we see 4.5 gigabits per second tested by NTT. In Tokyo, we see Hong Kong Telecom with a roadmap to 1 gigabit per second service on their path to 10 gigabits per second. Speed is money, they say in Hong Kong. Then we highlight the somewhat slower thought around what's going on with the EU and 5GPP. There is an investment announcement just this past February of the 700 million euro to accelerate 5G development. So we see quite a difference there, right? So we see active government, operator, and vendor participation to actually create those next layers of data rates to achieve the next step in LTE on a path to 5G with a pretty strong imperative to be first movers compared to an EU, which is trying to move in a more traditional group of let's get the stakeholders together, let's develop a consensus, let's move down the path, and so on. The good news is we think that they'll both get to the destination, but this is the fireworks that I spoke about. We're going to see some pops in Asian market, I think, before we see some full-fledged 5G in EMEA. And then we take the Americas market, and by that I more specifically mean the U.S. This is where we've digested and deployed a lot of LTE, and so there's a strong desire to get the total value from the LTE capacity that's existent in the market. Although there's some carrier aggregation plays, it's more of an incremental approach to 5G simply because there's already a lot of investment that needs to be fully monetized from the nationwide LTE deployments, the ongoing LTE deployments in the U.S. market in particular. So R&D work, no question, going on in the Americas and the U.S. in particular, but the deployment scheme, I think, is going to take a little bit of time. So if I were to bet on this, if we had bet and assumed the winner of who was the region-winning 3G, we clearly would have chosen EMEA or Western Europe at least. The winner of 4G, by virtue of the speed to deployment, has certainly been the United States. I would bet on Asia right now as the marketplace where we will see 5G emerge first, and in that sense there's a leapfrog effect that will gratify some of the national identity approaches of the Asian market. In the end, though, we're all going to see maturation of the technology characteristics to allow a lot of use cases across the different populated regions, the urban environments, more gradually in less urban environments, and so on across each of these geographies. I wanted to come back a bit to monetization, though. I believe monetization cannot be emphasized enough, and there really are breadcrumbs in the existing businesses of operators to understand how they might be able to monetize 5G. If you take a step back, an operator today typically participates in 4 kinds of services that are delivered. Access services, communication services, Internet of Things types of services, and video services. So in the access services, that is just getting the capacity anywhere and at any time the user wants, we'll be able to move from a operator-defined access environment to a user-defined access environment. This is based on the architecture that will allow more of an on-demand capacity and latency requirement based on the user-defined specifications. This can be offered at a different sort of one-size-fits-all compensation scheme. We can have an elevated premium pricing for different kinds of access, user-defined access requirements, much as the way we can today buy higher capacity for our cable service or broadband service. We'll be able to do not just capacity, but a number of factors through self-service portals. We see a movement in access services to a 5G-enabled access portal that will really have a lot more discretionary ability for the end customer, tied to a premium pricing or scaled pricing model for the operator. And this will be much more valuable in a 5G environment than it is in today's environment, which really doesn't fully allow for that deep of a user-defined environment. In communication services, similar thing can happen here. By communication services, we mean voice, video, messaging kinds of applications, but it's around communication. So video conferencing, messaging, instant messaging, secure video conference, anything that has to do with person-to-person dialogues, person-to-person interaction, it can become much more personalized. So a personalized menu that allows individual users to specify the nature of criticality of their communication, security requirements they want, the fidelity they want, the device environment they want, all these things. A much more highly personalized set of offers and communication services, again, 5G enabled and with a different pricing scheme from the operator. Both of those, incidentally, are things that we often have that debate about. Can those be disintermediated by an over-the-top player? And I think they cannot be as easily disintermediated. Both of them are going to be highly network infrastructure dependent, and so this is another chance for operators to, yet again, find a value-added service that differentiates from some of the traditional internet model services we have today. Similarly, in video, same kind of user discretion, user-defined model. A lot more flexibility, though, on the other side. With a two-sided model, users are getting to choose from different kinds of premium services or non-premium services. On the programmer advertiser side, the operator can offer a selection of reach to different kinds of users with different environments, both for programming and for advertising, optimized for devices, optimized for different kinds of bundles. So we see another value here of 5G enabling a video service, and this is, of course, much more likely to be capable of delivery across different device types by virtue of the high capacity, high data rate. In fact, one of the early cases for even advanced LTE is just how much more quickly a user can experience a real-time video feed in a mobile device that's moving at accelerated speed down the road, for example. A lot more different kinds of use case values, but strongly emphasized here still is user-defined, and then on the other end it would be programmer and advertiser-defined, but the capability of the operator to cater the network to meet these kinds of requirements gets a price value as well as or becomes something that they can actually do. And I've already discussed the Internet of Things. Internet of Things requires a lot of flexibility because each vertical or horizontal application brings with it its own latency requirements, its own data density, its own business model for what kinds of devices, and more importantly, I think, in the Internet of Things, we're not just looking for data collection that gets aggregated to make later decisions. It's about autonomous operation, self-driving cars, medical operations that have a way to develop emergency alerts that provide chain reactions in the system that get us further down the road of giving care, industrial processes that are more automated. These values, the more requirement for automation and for the back and forth on the network between collecting data, reacting to data, and analyzing it, has a lot of flexibility requirements that only a 5G environment 5G architecture is going to be able to deliver on, and therefore will enable a lot more IoT. So I would make the proposition that we really haven't seen IoT, and one of the reasons why the technology or the business cases are moving so slowly is because much of the flexibility doesn't exist in the network to make them as easily delivered. So really wanted to highlight monetization factors for the 5G implementations. I feel it is no longer viable to have a conversation about 5G without bringing up NFV and SDN. The architecture behind the access has to change, has to become more capable of delivering on-demand services. And we know from the early days of NFV and SDN, this is about virtualization. It's about a more highly automated back end with orchestrated service delivery with service providers moving towards this model and much more cost effective for the service providers to deliver. So these are dependencies now we believe that 5G has on the NFV SDN movement. Operators we've spoken to are now beginning to wed their two discussions together. The same conversation about virtualizing the packet core involves, well, what does that mean for our 5G architecture, centralized or decentralized? The two parallel developments impact each other when access meets core, and so this requires a consistent understanding that the SDN will figure into the 5G plans and vice versa. So how long is this going to take? It's very encouraging to see the rapid movement in NFV and SDN that we expect is going to manifest more value for the operator in a shorter term than the next 5 years. However, by 2020, based on all the data points we've seen so far, NFV SDN core architecture should be well along the path in time for the emergence of better radio access technologies that are going to be delivering on the 5G characteristics, so supported by NFV SDN backend. All should come to the 2020 timeframe in a way that's going to enable a lot of the use cases we've been talking about. So very much strong movement there, and any strategy that involves understanding NFV SDN should holistically also, if it's a mobile operator, be looked at as a 5G strategy factor into that movement towards NFV SDN and vice versa. So now we'll turn to the last portion of our webinar, some of the operator and supplier positions and what we see as the reasons and advantages of these positions. First, we'll look at the operators. First, we are of the belief that there won't be a tier 1 operator that will not become a 5G player. It is a factor of the market. You can see by the use cases that we have put forward that the value across the major service areas for the operators exists, and any multi-access operator, any operator that's deeply into the mobile environment on a national and multinational basis is going to need to play in 5G to stay competitive, as well as to gain the advantages of new cost models and revenue models, which most operators desperately need going into the future. Indications that operators are moving in that direction can be found not only in their 5G niches, but also how rapidly they're moving towards NFV and SDN. The one with the greatest strategic focus and most advanced work right now in the marketplace we perceive to be NTT. And this we have here in our 2x2 where we're showing strategic importance and rate of adoption. No one, of course, is at a top right-hand position. It's more of an evolution of a race. The cluster of Asian operators you see there, operating activity within China Mobile, activity within the Korean operators in Japan, leveraging their dense markets and high level availability of capital are causing them to go out in front with a more rapid path to commercialization. It does not hurt that the salient events, the Olympics, winter and summer, are going to be happening in those marketplaces. So that will be very much an important benchmark for these operators to achieve. And the other key point there is a strong weighting of national interest in Korea, in Japan, in China, to the operators' desire to achieve these capabilities, this whole leapfrog effect of Asia becoming the 5G leadership marketplace, which is really, we believe, a significant driver. Europe, we believe, is going to move more rapidly and a benchmark kind of provider here. We've only shown some sampling of them, but organizations like Telefonica and Vodafone moving as multinational, multi-regional operators with 5G high on the strategic screen, as well as investments going on with the operators, with the suppliers, post them as a strong next up group of rate of adoption. And then we see, as I mentioned earlier, the U.S. operators as taking a bit more incremental approach. The LTE digestion factor, the capital crunch, the fusion of trying to incorporate mergers, acquisitions, and dealing with media and OTT competition, all factoring in to make the U.S. operators slower at driving towards 5G. And then we believe other markets, the LTE consumption markets, some leading players in MEA, in the rest of Asia, in India, are going to also ramp up towards 5G, but at a slower rate. Similarly, the strategic importance is somewhat less for them as they digest their LTE deployments, continue to work on monetizing LTE or continuing LTE deployments. That goes for the bulk of the rest of the operators too. So another idea here to say no big bang across all operators all at once, a lot of fireworks even on an operator or regional basis that are going to continue to move us on this evolution of 5G. And this is not surprising, and many of our previous phases, LTE, 3G, did evolve through sections of operators and sections of regions at a time. And we don't expect that to be any different. What will be interesting to see is the relative position of operators. So this is today's view. Does the renewed efforts of the European Commission push Europe a little bit closer to the Asian aggressive approach to this? Do the U.S. operators shift their position? We'll be monitoring that very closely. But for the time being, this is the way we see the market evolution. So let's look at suppliers, and here we've really only looked at some of the very largest suppliers. Now, the ecosystem for 5G, as for NFV and SDN, is expanding. We are looking at a burgeoning ecosystem where players at a sub-systems view are able to come in with technology innovation, and the operators are welcoming them in the door because they believe innovation and open systems is a way to move at a more economic model for them. So there will be another chart here about first movers and different players with respect to the smaller vendors who are participating in the 5G ecosystem. That said, let's look at a few of the players that are trying to be, let's say, have ownership of the solution space for 5G and how quickly they're doing adoption and what the strategic importance of the technology is to them. Clearly, the market share leaders in wireless infrastructure, Ericsson, Huawei, have to be treating this with high strategic importance. They cannot afford to be falling behind in a race towards the next technology. And there is not a lot to choose between them. They're taking different approaches. I would say Huawei appears to be evolving more aggressively with the Asian market. Yes, significant R&D going on, a lot of the capital available for R&D in Huawei and China is really driving them. but they have the advantage of being well positioned in many of the operators that are leading the Asian push to 5G. Ericsson, similarly, and has a significant R&D effort going on, has a little bit of a split personality around 5G, participating in the Asian markets, but also more deeply embedded in 5GPP, perhaps than Huawei, and having a strong position in the incremental progress in the United States market as well. So taken together, we see them moving at very similar paths and likely to achieve significant positioning. For instance, Ericsson may achieve value with NTT, where Huawei is achieving it with China Mobile. These kinds of things, but very much in parallel areas. We look at Nokia and Alcatel-Lucent, perhaps soon to become the new Nokia, as having strong technology in 5G, but a little less holistically as a total solution than Ericsson and Huawei, more focused on areas of the RAN, the liquid networks approach for Nokia. There's very advanced developments in virtualization for Nokia and Alcatel-Lucent that we think will put them deeply into the race, and the time it takes for them to digest the fruits of the impacts of the merger, and also discern which product lines they're going to be keeping and focusing on are all requirements that will perhaps make them a little bit behind the Ericsson and Huawei movement. And then the cluster of other major players here that are taking a stake in 5G, and here I'll just highlight Samsung. Samsung's been very aggressive in putting out high data rate implementations in the Korean market, really being able to leverage its position in some of the Asian operators to push the envelope and get really into the game in a way that it perhaps wasn't able to get into the game for LTE. And we believe that's going to be a continued success story for them to really act as a bit of a spur towards some of the larger market shareholders to manage the push toward 5G. So that's an overview of the suppliers and operators. And I just have one more look to the future to consider before we take a few questions at the end of the webinar. Taking all this into consideration, we definitely see the movement towards 5G. We see the advance towards the obstacles, and we see the potential use cases. But what about the further understanding of how the economics of the operator and the supplier changes as we move to a 5G environment, an environment that has a lot more flexibility in terms of business model? We see three different monetization approaches, if you will, for operators and for that matter for suppliers. Some of them resonate with traditional views of the marketplace, right? You could imagine that in the past we could have seen some of these splits, but in general, a commodity business model versus a premium business model. You heard me mention several times that premium is a key attribute. Offering premium services that leverages a unique network proposition is something the operators can now will be able to take advantage of as a result of 5G. That, I believe, is a key reason for them to move to 5G more aggressively than to spend less time focusing on the commodity model best exemplified by pure cloud access services. The difference being premium equates to me as more readily user-defined for quality of service, type of service, and so on, versus commodity where you get one size fits all and pay the lowest possible price, and it's very much a operator or service provider defined model where price point is the governing value. Where premium, you get the quality that you're paying for, and yet again, opening the door to operators can differentiate based on quality of service in a premium 5G world. The consumption model, therefore, the other side of that is very much a user capability. Now, user-defined and custom in that opens up another door. Not only can there be a user-defined on-demand model that's fairly standardized by operators, there can also be custom models. And here I'm thinking more by enterprise, Internet of Things, focuses that are going to be more catering to individual private services. And then last but not least, Internet of Things and 5G opens up more of a machine model approach, that is to say, machine responses or network with less human intervention responses to use cases for autonomous operations, for intuitive, as in the network acting in an intuitive way in reaction to usage requirements. This whole machine models opens up with the Internet of Things enabled by a 5G network. So this combination of consumption models, business models, and machine models, these become much more interesting after 2020, when we've got the network in place, when we've got the, let's say, some of the technical hurdles achieved and some of the back-end operations achieved. I would say on the way to these, things like the user-defined models, premium video services, some of the autonomy that can be introduced into the early stages of IoT are ways to give the operator some experience with the business models they will be later putting full steam behind in the 5G world. So it's a statement about where we can go in the future as well as where we can be in the present. So with that, I'd like to conclude the webinar and ask Justin to take a look at some of the questions we have.
Sure thing. So yeah, if you guys have any questions, please send them to the Q&A function now. And with that, we'll get started. So the first question, how will operator spending on 5G evolve?
The operator spending on 5G is going to be also, we believe, not a big bang. It will not be a rollout of something called 5G overlay the way, or replacement the way LTE has been. We believe 5G spending is already starting to manifest in advanced LTE spending. So the continued evolution of the LTE architecture by operators, and in parallel, we're beginning to see what I believe to be 5G-related spending in the NFV-SDN world. So those are two early threads of 5G spending that are manifest already. Densification is a third one. So those are three buckets you can start to say they're going to have 5G trajectories. A fourth one's going to be as we move forward into some of the technical breakthrough technologies, I'll call them, that require different kinds of equipment, different kinds of software and service implementations, call that 5G other. So four buckets would be extended LTE architecture, the core SDN and NFV architecture, and then the addition of the 5G specific technologies and densification. So there are at least four buckets, some of which already are manifesting some spending. So the way that's going to move is going to be a gradual ramp up of spend, which the operators are going to try and fit within the existing CapEx frameworks. They're not going to be able to greatly increase CapEx with 5G, but it does speak to a sustained capital investment in the network that's required to achieve the premium or higher value business models that operators need to achieve.
All right. The next question, how will, excuse me, how will net neutrality impact 5G?
I would say net neutrality is initially an inhibitor of the innovation that 5G can allow the operator. Without net neutrality, an operator would already be working to discover what kind of gating of capability, gating of access could gain a different price point from the end user. So call it an operator-controlled way to determine types and the nature of access. Net neutrality does not allow that. In fact, there are regulatory reporting mechanisms that suggest when that's discovered, that will be consequences. So it drives user-defined, in my mind. User-defined access and access definition becomes an antidote to net neutrality, but creates a different set of thinking and processes on the operator's behalf to understand how to work with the user-defined menu options that they're going to have to provide versus trying to set the stage from the operator side. And I believe it mainly affects mainly affects a consumer environment. I think there is an ability to pay for premium services on an enterprise environment already today.
All right, moving on to the next question. Will 5G require a new core network technologies for supporting the 1,000 additional capacity?
The short answer is yes, and in fact, that's where NFV and SDN come in. It's all about improved capacity utilization on the core network. And so you have to have that back end. You have to have, of course, the three aspects. So you have to have a highly dense access with the availability of spectrum. You have to have the core, you have to have backhaul, I was going to say, that can manage that capacity, as well as the core network that's going to be able to be servicing the on-demand requirements capacity where it's required. So that's why NFV SDN is wedded strongly to the focus on 5G.
All right, and I think we have time for one last question here because we're almost out of time. And that is, how does a 5G business model change versus 3G and 4G business model? Key assets for carriers are spectrum and site, but when 5G with higher frequency adopted, more small cells are required. Those verticals in each industry would like to share revenue and data with telco carriers. So I guess, yeah, how does that business model change versus 3G and 4G?
Right, I would say, so the 3G and 4G business models today are more about access buckets to buckets of data on the consumer side, and still data-oriented services on the enterprise side. We're beginning to set, so just as spectrum slices become important, the slices of data services, so the characteristics of the data services, become something now we can have pricing models around. This whole one-size-fits-all data bucket that we're living with, that was ushered in by 4G, now becomes something that can be sliced and differentiated based on demand characteristics, whether that be the enterprise, the consumer, or the IoT. And because of things like net neutrality, it becomes much more user-defined. By the end of the day, it becomes a new kind of value proposition for the operator. Then they're able to do as effectively and ideally inexpensively as, or cost-effectively, put it that way, as they could do with 4G.
All right, well, I think that's all we have for time. So thank you, everyone, for attending today's presentation, and thank you, Michael, for taking the time to give today's presentation. You can follow both Michael and TBR on the Twitter handles listed here, and please check out our pages on SlideShare and YouTube as well. And just a reminder, we will be following up with everybody via email with the recording link from today's webinar as well as the slides. And additionally, before you sign off, we'd like to ask you to take a very brief survey about today's webinar. We're always looking to improve the information we provide and how we provide it, so your feedback would be greatly appreciated. We'll leave the chat function open for another minute or two for folks to ask any last-minute questions. Otherwise, have a great afternoon. Thanks.